but either way, I want to then view it from the perspective of not the notes, but the relative position. That allows me to transpose it. So even if I'm writing in the collection of notes around the key of C, I would name that first, name it over here. This is the key of C, collection of notes, and then write it without referring to any notes. Why? Because then you can transpose it. Then all I have to do is change over here. Now I'm looking at the collection of notes around the D, right? D major and everything. I don't need to rewrite anything, right? It's all already there. You just transpose everything shape-wise, which is easy to do on a guitar, and I get on a piano. There's a reason why the tablature developed the way it did, because then you can name the sharps and flats and so on and so forth, which are going to map out differently. But that's only on the piano, and even on the piano, it should be pretty clear that you could just basically shift everything up. The pattern still shifts up. It's just the shape of the keys that are different sizes, which leads you to want to name the number of sharps and flats and all that kind of stuff. But so that's going to be the general idea. Now, once you have this, then of course it should be in a MIDI system available to you to map it out. Now, this is using the numbering systems for MIDI, so that allows us to map it out, and this is just using the letters. So now we're just going to say this is the lowest C, and it's mapping out here. Now, if I changed the tonic, then all that would happen is that if I changed that tonic to a 6 to the D, but it's still D major, then this whole pattern would shift up to here, is one way that you can think of it, right? This whole thing would shift up to here. This orange bit right here would be the lowest note, and this orange bit over here would be the D now. And when it shifts over here, the whole thing would be shifting up from this perspective, have the same exact shape, because it would still be D Ionian. It would still be D Ionian, right? So this would shift up to here. Everything would be the same D Ionian. Okay, so but the little bit more complex thing is to shift from the Ionian around the modal perspectives to like the Dorian or something like that. Notice that if I'm looking at it this way, you might say, well, I shouldn't have to do anything, because if I write the song from relative position, these are the Nashville numbers. So if I transpose this to think about it in Dorian, well, the 2 is the Dorian. So all I would have to do is, if the song was written so that it emphasizes or it leads back to the 2, then the 2 would be the tonic, and it would be in Dorian. You'd have the same collection of 7 notes, but the song would be in Dorian, which is true. So that's one way that you can kind of think of it, that you're basically looking at the 2 in Dorian. But if you take octaves into consideration, this middle row, if I say this Dorian is the tonic, I would like the Dorian to basically be the lowest note. So if I tell the system, look, the Dorian is the tonic, then and I wrote the same thing, then you would think that this 1 would be higher up in pitch than the 2. Whereas if I told it that I'm writing this in Ionian, then I would think that the 1 right here would be lower in pitch than the 2 over here. That's one thing that to consider. And then if I was to, the other thing that would be nice is that if I want to rotate the song or part of the song from Ionian to Dorian, this whole thing should be shifting forward. So there's 2 things that we can write here. One is the chord, which is actually easier to shift forward because I can just change it from the Ionian node 1 step up to the Dorian node, and then it'll map on the fact that it has a minor third as opposed to a major third. So the whole thing will rotate around, snapping into place for the chord that will fit. Meaning if I wrote a chord that is in the collection of notes, I should land on a chord that uses all the notes that are in the collection of notes, and it should make the Dorian, the root note, the lowest note. Whereas if I wrote a relative modal perspective or just a singular note, then if it's a whole note, I should rotate it. Meaning if it's a 1, it's going to rotate to a 2. That would mean it's an Ionian, it's going to rotate to a Dorian. If it's a Dorian, it's going to rotate to a Phrygian. If it's a 3, Phrygian, I'm sorry, if it's a 3 Phrygian, it's going to rotate to a Lydian. Now, if it's a 2.5, that would rotate to a 4.5. There is a 3.5. There is no 3.5. That's where the snapping comes into play, right? You have to say, if you rotate it up 1 and you have something that's in the ocean or not in the collection of notes, if I rotate it up 1 number, then, and it's still not in the collection of notes, fine. But it's possible that if I rotate it up, I'm going to land in the middle here. There is nothing there, so it's going to snap into a number that is in the collection of notes. So that's going to be the only thing that's a little bit wonky, but it's totally doable from a formula standpoint, and then I can rotate this forward. So if I played it in the Ionian, then I should be able to shift everything to the Dorian. So now this whole thing has been shifted up. The numbers have shifted up. The one other thing that's a little wonky is that if something was a 7, it would get shifted up to an 8, but the 8 is over the 7 note collection, so it would come back down to a 1. But remember that 1 is lower, is higher in pitch than the 2 now, because the 2 is the Dorian. Now again, this might all sound a little bit like that's way too complicated, and so on and so forth, if you've learned piano music theory your entire life. But I would guarantee you that if you're looking at most people that are using a DAW that haven't learned piano theory their entire life, this is easier than learning the piano theory. The piano actually leads a lot of things in. It forces you into this thinking of sharps and flats, which you normally wouldn't do. And it forces you into making the C major like some kind of holy grail like key where it's not in reality, right? So most people if they're not using a keyboard in their DAW system, you shouldn't be giving them a piano keyboard to learn to play on a DAW unless they want to learn the piano, right? Because on a DAW, like this would be way easier to learn. You're just like, hey, look, you want to play a song, you just play the notes on a 10 key like a typewriter, 1 through 7, and then you have 5 notes in the ocean, right? So most people are basically just adding the notes 1 through 7 from a Nashville number perspective, and then you just say, hey, look, you want to make whatever each of those notes, one of them needs to be the tonic, right? So if you make the 2 the tonic, just remember that's going to be the lowest note in the progressions of notes. All the other notes are going to be higher in each row. Those rules are way easier to be able to play in multiple keys and multiple modes than to learn that the piano C is the master key and so on. So I just want to point that out because I'm sure there'll be a lot of, that's not standard. I get it. It's not standard. The standard is whack. It's like, okay, but